The Walking Dead The Game Season 2 is the 5-part episodic follow-up to what I thought was one of the best games of 2012, which is why I feel kind of apprehensive about recommending this follow-up, even though it does have its own commendable quirks. It has a lot to live up to, and honestly, no matter how much you end up liking it, I bet you're not gonna like it as much as the first one. The puppy-eyed little girl support character from the first game is now our cat-eyed main character in the second game. She's a little more competent, but can be, by player choice, just as naive. And while she gradually grows out of that by the end, the game ultimately doesn't strip us of the agency or the player's own maturity that we experienced the first game with. Putting us in the shoes of a little girl seems like it would have been an interesting angle to witness a zombie apocalypse from, but it's not exactly a radical change of perspective. I suppose a zombie apocalypse would cause childhood to end a bit earlier, but a lot of characters here are suspiciously eager to let this girl shoot her way through zombie hordes, operate heavy machinery, or just blame her when everything goes wrong. The Telltale games have never really excelled in terms of production values, but the stiff, animatronic characters of this game are fighting an uphill battle to convey their drama. That was the defining trait I found in the first 3 episodes. A lot of flat, declarative delivery, a lot of wonky animations, and ineffective stingers. That wasn't unsurprising though. After all, the first season didn't really pick up until the 3rd episode, but at least the second one was a rollicking fun ride on your way there. In comparison, Season 2 doesn't really pick up until episode 4 out of the 5 of them. On our way there, enemies become friends, villains come and go, characters learn and grow, but I never really felt the stakes rise or the relationships between our characters develop enough for me to really care until it was too late. Your results may vary, but it wasn't until episode 4 when I began to finally feel invested in the drama. That was also when I noticed that these characters were taking a few minutes to have some quiet time. It takes that long for them to crack jokes and have casual, friendly conversations with each other, critical moments of likability that they don't have in previous episodes.
Clem found a jacket.
That's great, but isn't gray we can't put Rebecca in a Confederate coat.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Until then, a whole lot of characters come and go at a very fast pace. There's a lot of tension and anger in the group, a lot of action scenes, and not a whole lot of opportunities for those characters to really show themselves as rich, multidimensional characters rather than something more robotic. Clementine's sleepy vocal delivery here doesn't help either.
I don't see a key around here. That man probably had it.
So then I have to wonder if there's any merit to replaying this thing. The first Walking Dead was enjoyable a second time through, thanks to the strength of its writing alone, and The Wolf Among Us had a story so dense with mystique and detail that it had me saying, oh, the second time through, when everything made sense. But without either of those merits, a second playthrough of this season just highlights how these games aren't really meant to be replayed. Just as in those other games, the illusion of choice is particularly elusive here. After all, the variables and decisions this game is tracking aren't necessarily designed to help you make your own story, but to rather make a personalized and immersive version of their story. Some button presses during the gorier QTEs may make you wince physically behind the screen. In the rush of an action scene, you may make a critical decision by accident, and you'll feel the full weight of your mistake thanks to the permanently on autosaves. You'll probably struggle with a few of those outcomes, since Telltale doesn't often like to write objectively good decisions for us to make. But good or bad, they're not exactly going to branch the story off into different directions. The replay is more like discovering Easter eggs than it is discovering an alternate version of the story or the gameplay.
That was awkward. I won't do that again. I'm gonna go work now.
It's not all bad, though. It's just worse than its predecessors. I found myself at the edge of my seat during the last 2 episodes, but I was struggling to keep myself playing during the first 3. And come to think of it, that's kind of the exact opposite of how I felt about the pacing of The Wolf Among Us. It started great with the first 3 episodes and kind of petered out for the last 2. And maybe this is a bit of a stretch here, but I can't help but notice that turning point in quality for both series happened around the same time, July 2014. That's when Walking Dead started to get good and Wolf Among Us started to get bad. And with the Borderlands and Game of Thrones games announced just before that 4-month delay between the first 2 Wolf Among Us episodes, I can't help but wonder if Telltale is truly cut out to be juggling all these multiple projects at once. It's too much work with too many cooks in the kitchen. I mean, look at how many different writers got juggled between the different episodes of the second Walking Dead season. None of the original writers returned, and the first season just had only one recurring writer who consistently did every other episode. That's why I suspect this season has a lot of weird narrative inconsistencies.
I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, but there are a few things you need to know about my daughter.
Okay.
She isn't like you. You may not get that initially, but once you're around her for a while, you'll understand. If she knew how bad the world is, what it's really like out there, she would cease to function.
Like that guy. In the first episode, he makes such a big deal over why he wants to keep his daughter ignorant of the zombie apocalypse, before the second episode, where everyone just goes out and chops through zombies in front of her like it was never a big deal. But like I said earlier, things do pick up as Murphy's Law kicks in during the last 2 episodes. It's just kind of a shame that the journey on our way there is a roller coaster ride of quality standards. And that's why I think fans might be better off missing this one. The first season of Walking Dead games was a seminal storytelling event. It's something that should be looked at as a classic example of how to write a video game tearjerker. I thought that The Wolf Among Us was also done very well and had a bit of a highbrow and preachy flavor to it that kept it nicely distant from The Walking Dead. But this one feels like it had a lot less love put into it. If you enjoyed Season 1, you might be better off remembering it end on the high note that it did, rather than plod through 3 episodes of something less stellar. But wait, it would be unsatisfying to end the review there, now wouldn't it? Season 2 wrapped up a couple months ago, so I'm going to include some thoughts on story spoilers. The rest of this video is going to be for people who've already played the game and just want to indulge in a discussion about it. And really, the reason I wanted to include this section is because the one thing I really liked about these episodes is a spoiler in and of itself.
Kenny!
I love the way they wrote Kenny here, which is probably why I like the later episodes better, because in those he gets an arc. He becomes a more interesting character than anyone else there. He's got 2 extremely contrasted sides to himself. One is a destructive loose cannon of violent energy, and the other is a tender family man. In terms of practicality, he's the only big, strong, muscly man in the group who can overpower bad guys, and he also knows how to deliver babies, which are both practical skills for a zombie apocalypse, but what an interesting contrast they both present. Since kids are the only thing that soften him up enough to keep him from destroying himself or others, he's not exactly useful to anyone else. And we're seeing this character from the perspective of a little girl he cares about. And that perspective is another thing that finally gets explored in the later episodes. He takes on a role that's probably not dissimilar to what living with an abusive parent might be like. He's someone we hate and fear, but we're still pressured to keep him around because that's what's expected of us. And for our purposes, it's just practical, even though we know it might not be healthy in the long term. So from episodes 3 to 5, enemies become friends, and then become enemies again, and during that whole process, we see Kenny become either or, up until the very end, when his final decision is either one of selfishness or selflessness, depending on how you play. That was cool. I really like the endings, and the events that lead up to them, and that's one reason why I don't think Season 2 is totally a botch job of The Walking Dead. It just doesn't hit as hard as the former one. It sticks to the theme and the soul of the franchise very well. Kenny kind of fills in as an identifiable father figure, much like Lee, but this time our perspectives are simply switched around. And just like last time, child rearing is a recurring theme, which is kind of reinforced even further by the pregnant ladies everywhere. And how all the children keep getting baptized in zombie guts. Those are always gruesome scenes. It really feels like our heroes are hitting rock bottom when zombies are easier to deal with than the survivors. After all, in every iteration of The Walking Dead, it's never really the zombies that give our heroes a hard time, but rather humanity's inability to unite against them. Just like the last season, this one is a pessimistic study of the millions of tragedies that make up this universe. Minor secondary characters, right down to the dog in the first episode, feel like they went through their own tear-jerking tragedy, just as complicated as our own. The moral of the story is that everyone out there is just trying to survive. But unfortunately, we're not all in this together.
choice?
Of course.
Really?
Nah, not really.